Alright, so money supply. So basically, money supply is the total money circulating in an economy. So that's a literal definition of what money supply is. Money supply can be broken down into three categories. The first is the narrow monetary base. So narrow monetary base is all kinds of money that can be used as a medium of exchange. This means all the notes and coins in circulation plus cash in the bank stills. Then we have wide monetary base. So wide monetary base is first the narrow monetary base plus all commercial banks' operational balances with the central banks. We know that central banks is a lender of last resort, right? And central bank basically acts like a bank for all the commercial banks. Then finally, the last category is broad money. So broad money means the wide monetary base plus all private sector bank deposits. This includes individual savings account, business savings account, and this is important because all of this leads to credit creation. So basically, broad money is the narrow monetary base, the wide monetary base plus all near monies. And one important note is that any cash that belongs to the central bank does not constitute the money supply. It's not the part of the money supply. So any cash or any money that belongs to a central bank is not part of the money supply. Okay, so primarily money supply is affected by changes by the monetary supply, which is controlled by the central bank. The central bank applies a monetary supply, either an expansionary or a contractionary. We'll talk about monetary supply in detail in our future videos. But what increases the money supply? So let's say the government prints more money. Let's say the government wants to buy more securities, so the government demands securities. So the government will demand securities, and it will supply money. So that's one way how money supply increases. The other way is when interest rates fall. So when interest rates fall, people switch from savings accounts to the current accounts, right? So if they do that, this will lead to an increase in money supply. Because current account means that there will be an increased demand for money, and to cater to that increased demand for money, the money supply will rise. And the money supply will rise through the credit multiplier, which is also called the money multiplier. Then reserve ratio falls. So if reserve ratio falls, this means that there are less leakages in an economy. If there is less leakage in an economy, the credit multiplier, denoted by CM, will rise. This will lead to more credit creation. So credit creation increases, the money supply increases. Then open market operations. So we'll discuss in detail about the open market operations when we talk about monetary supply. But through the open market operations, the government will demand bonds and they will supply money. So basically, the government will buy bonds. Then finally, the public sector borrowing requirement. If public sector borrowing requirement increases, the government borrowing increases. This means that at the time of repayment, the central bank prints more money to repay. So if the central bank prints more money to repay, this will lead to a rise in money supply. So this is all about increments in the money supply. What about decrease in money supply? So like the government buys bonds. Another part of open market operations is that the government sells bonds to the public. So the government will supply bonds and it will demand money. Then the reserve ratio goes up. The reserve ratio goes up. This implies that your credit multiplier falls. Your credit multiplier falls, your credit creation falls, and your money supply falls. Then your interest rates rise. Interest rates rise. This means there are high returns to be gained from savings accounts. So people shift from current account to savings account. The demand for money falls. Demand for money falls. The demand for the supply for money falls. So finally, this falls as well. But if the government sells bonds and that cash goes towards government expenditure, the money supply is unchanged because existing money only changes hands from consumers to government. The government is again expending that money in the form of government expenditure. So now let's talk about how to sketch the money supply curve. So the followers of the monetarist school of thought believe that the money supply is exogenous. It's fixed by your central bank. And this is what the money supply looks like. Right, so this is, let me write this down, the monetarist theory. This means that money supply is fixed by the central bank. On the other hand, and on the axis, this is the quantity for money, and this is the interest rate. On the other hand, followers of the Keynesian school of thought believe that the supply for money comes from savings. This means that according to them, this is what the supply for money looks like. They say that if interest rates rise, savings rise. Savings rise, which means that cash in the savings account is less likely to be withdrawn, and since this cash stays with the banks, this leads to more credit creation because banks now have more cash to give out to lend it to consumers. So I'll denote credit creation by CC. Their credit creation increases, and when credit creation increases, the money supply increases. Also, that's one part of it. The other part is that a rise in interest rates implies that there is hot capital inflow. So hot capital inflow means that your demand for local currency, let's say the demand for rupees rises. Your demand for rupee rises, your price for rupee rises. Simple law of demand. And to maintain the exchange rate, the government will sell rupees in foreign exchange market to maintain the exchange rate stability, right? So government sells, so this means that government will sell rupees in the foreign exchange market, and this will lead to a rise in money supply. Therefore, these are two money supply diagrams. This is for Keynesian school of thought, and this one's for the monetarists. Right, so this is it all about the money supply. In the next video, we'll talk about interest rate determination using the liquidity preference curve and the monetarist supply curve.